Welcome to Not Just Money with your hosts, Doretta and Li. This isn't your typical podcast about finances. It's a podcast about all the money conversations we aren't having, sometimes not even with ourselves. Join us on this journey of hard truths, lived experience, and the wisdom that comes from both. Because money is never just about money.
Hey Lee, I know you're ready for this one. Marriage contract or prenup or whatever it is you want to call it.
Yeah, I am. To be honest, I was really hoping there'd be some details about Taylor Swift's, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Not even a single picture. But I have mad respect for her powers as a celebrity. Mad respect.
Oh, what about that 40-page agreement?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it last week, right? It's a lot of it is just tabloid fodder and social media speculation. The 40-page agreement, the confidentiality provisions, the dollar details, clauses that she can't write songs about Travis. I am actually tempted to look into prediction markets to see what's getting bets on. Ha ha, not. That's a plug for our previous episode on prediction markets. Seriously, it's coming. Go check it out. Episode 33.
I think if I were Travis, I'd want that one about not being written about. Her diss tracks are pretty infamous.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you would want to live on in infamy, but
Play with infamy?
yeah, 100%. But it's all just speculation. There's not even any verified confirmation that there is a prenup. Though, given the brilliance of her legal team to date, there just has to be. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than 40 pages.
Yeah, I'm sure there is one, and I'm sure it is as detailed as it could possibly be. Think about what she has done to protect her IP. I think some really leading edge stuff, trademarks, copyrights, licensing. I think the way she says her name, all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty hard to believe she'd let something like a prenup go. But what there has been, I think, in the legitimate press, and I mean by legitimate press, stuff with real journalists who have ethics and codes of conduct and fact checks and all that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
is interviews with legal experts. And what they talk about is what they'd expect to be covered in a prenup in a situation like that. Keeping premarital assets separate, protecting her future music royalties, intellectual property, planning around future business ventures, and how future assets would be treated, privacy, confidentiality, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, probably even provisions around future kids. But what they're talking about is what their agreement is likely to contain. They aren't talking about an actual document that's been made public and probably never will. When you knock off all those zeros, a lot of this stuff is really basic and it applies to all of us. Discussions about who owns what before and during marriage, what to keep separate, what is shared. These are the kinds of discussions everyone should be having before they get married.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. I know you are a huge fan of marriage contracts. You have one. You think everyone should have one.
I have and I do. And okay, for those listening, before you stop this podcast, it's not just about the assets you have, it is about so much more. And whether you're Taylor Swift rich, which is very few of us, or still living paycheck to paycheck, all this applies to you. And today we're going to talk about why and maybe a bit about how.
So before we begin, a huge warning. We are not lawyers. We're going to talk about marriage contracts in the context of why you should have one and how to talk about it with your partner. We are absolutely not giving you legal advice. When you get down to creating your contract, you need a lawyer, two lawyers, in fact, one for each of you. Marriage contracts are serious business, people. Do not muck around with this. Okay, let's start with the basics. What is a marriage contract, or as they call it south of the border, a prenup?
Okay, so a marriage contract, or a domestic contract, as they are sometimes called in Canada, you know how professionals love to name and rename things. is basically a legal contract that you draft up and sign before you get married. It sets out how financial matters will be handled during your marriage, and if the relationship ends, how property, debts, and sometimes spousal support will be dealt with. Remember that family law in Canada is provincially regulated, it's provincial jurisdiction, so there are some differences in the rules from province to province. But two things will hold true: you can't override law, and the courts can set aside parts of agreement if it's unfair or if it was entered into improperly. Like, for example, if one person was forced to sign it.
Yeah, and typically a marriage contract covers things like what assets remain separate property, who is responsible for what debts, how investment gains will be treated, ownership of a family business if there is one, how inheritances will be protected, and potentially some arrangements around spousal support.
And we heard some of that stuff and what the experts expect to find in Tay-Tay's prenup. Separate property. Hers just happens to be a couple of $1 billion of music rights and IP. That's not chump change.
Exactly. But note there's some important legal limits to what you can put in a prenup. So, generally, you cannot use a prenup to decide on parenting arrangements, child custody, or child support. The courts will always have the authority to protect the children's interests. And there's also, at least in Ontario and some other Canadian provinces, some really strict rules around the matrimonial home.
The important thing to remember is what Doretta said, right? That whole independent legal advice. For one thing, the law may not be what you think it is. A lot of our ideas have been shaped by American news media and by American television or Hollywood. But family law in Canada is a matter of provincial jurisdiction, like I mentioned, and you need professional advice to make sure the contract you develop is fair to both of you, but also is legally correct.
Okay, that's the basics of what a marriage contract is and does, but there are a lot of misconceptions around them. So I think we should do a little myth busting.
Oh, that's fun. Yes, you're totally right. There are so many misconceptions around marriage contracts. I blame popular media. And a lot of them come again from TV, movies, or courtroom dramas. Oh my God, courtroom dramas, or celebrity divorces. Let's give it a go. I'll start. Starting with the myth that prenups are only for rich people. This is so not true. Say you're a typical couple, early 30s, and between you, you've got a condo, some student loans, some retirement savings, and one of you has started a business. A marriage contract is definitely for you. And remember, they can protect all kinds of assets: family cottages, inheritances, pensions, future gifts, or simply clarify how debts and property will be handled. Here's the thing: people think that prenups are just about money, but really they're about expectations. The conversations around them can be so important. Family lawyers find couples will discuss careers, raising children, caring for aging parents, future inheritances, business ownership, and retirement. It's such a valuable thing to do. The legal document is simply the written record of those conversations.
Yep. And remember what we always say, money's never just money, and prenups are never just about money. Nothing ever is. Okay, another myth. There's also the idea that signing a marriage contract means that you expect to divorce and that if you really love someone, you don't need it. Again, so not true. I think the vast majority of people signing a marriage contract hope that they never need it. And I also don't think love and legal planning are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and remember what we talked about last week. Divorce rates, people, 50-ish% plus or minus, depending if it's your first marriage or not. That math doesn't lie. And I hate when people say, I don't want to talk about it because then my partner is going to think I don't truly love them. Like Doretta said, right? It's not that love and legal planning and solidifying your future needs to be in conflict.
There's absolutely no evidence that links marriage contracts to divorce rates. But what there is evidence to support is that couples who can talk about money honestly and respectfully and consistently, even if they don't agree about everything, have greater relationship satisfaction and lower divorce risk. It's about being able to have those transparent, respectful discussions. And that's where your discussions about a marriage contract should start.
Related to that, some people think that asking for marriage contract means you don't trust your partner. Actually, I've heard from family lawyers that the opposite can be true. Working out your marriage contract requires you to have those honest conversations about money and, more importantly, expectations of your future and fairness when you still like each other. Key.
And then there's the myth that marriage contracts are one-sided, that they're protecting one party and screwing the other. And again, it's just not true, or at any rate, it should not be true. The best marriage contracts are negotiated by both partners with independent legal advice. They reflect what both of you believe is fair, not just what one of you wants.
So true. And some folks also have the idea that you can put anything you want into a prenup and that once it's signed, it will all be upheld and can't be challenged. Nope. That's why you really need separate legal counsel. Courts will not enforce provisions that violate the law or public policy. In Canada, you cannot contract away a child's right to support, for example, and the courts can set aside all or part of a marriage contract if there was fraud, inadequate financial disclosure, duress, undue influence, or just a serious lack of understanding.
I think what a lot of this really boils down to is the idea that a marriage contract is about protecting yourself from your partner. But I think that's exactly the wrong way to look at it. I think the truth is that you aren't writing your marriage contract for the people you are today. You're writing it for two people who someday may be really hurt and scared and angry. You hope that's not true. You hope that never happens and that you will never need this agreement. But if it does happen, those hurt, scared, angry people will be so much better off with clear, fair rules that you're laying down now. So think of it as a gift to your future selves should they ever need it.
Aw, I love that. A gift for your future selves that you hope they never need. How poetic. Good job, Doretta.
I suspect it's kind of an odd way to think about it. I mean, for the record, I've been married forever and I do not have a marriage contract. Got married when I was a teenager, far back in the dark ages. I'd never heard of such a thing. But if I were a young person getting married today, I would absolutely want one. Different world.
I do have a marriage contract. It was absolutely non-negotiable for me, and here's why. I have worked hard for everything that I have built pre-marriage. Sorry, that's mine. It has nothing to do with love. It is my blood, sweat, and tears. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. I believe the more prepared you are, the less likely bad things happen. I don't expect to divorce my husband, but if it happens, I have to look out for me. We know that women overall get the short end of the stick on a number of financial fronts, and I refuse to be part of that statistic. I have a child and a dependent parent, so it's not just about me, it's also about them. We know, and I've stressed this many times, I have a strong need for fairness, my default independence, and for one thing I can share, there is no spousal support built into my contract because that was a point of discussion that we had. And if we were to get divorced, it would be the end of something, but not the loss of something, if that makes sense. And I think it's just so much more civilized to decide these things when you still like each other. What if it's a bad breakup? Let's just be reasonable today.
I think that makes good sense.
Yeah. When we had decided that this was for real and we were in the long haul, My husband and I went through all the essential conversations about money that is recommended to people before they get married, all of them. So it was pretty natural that the conversation around marriage contracts came up. And you've met my husband. He's very logical and I would say pretty stoic. So when I brought it up, his response was, "Cool. Sounds good." And then from there, we made an Excel spreadsheet of our assets and topics we wanted to cover.
Conversations difficult at all?
It was pretty easy for me, but I don't necessarily think that's typical. And I think that might be a bit of an unfair question. I live and breathe this stuff, and you know my motto, right? The shoemaker's family should have good shoes. So I think in some level, my husband knew this conversation was coming. He had to. Remember our first date when he offered the fact that he had no
No
debts,
debt.
right? I don't think that's a common introductory meeting. So I do not think it was coming out of the blue for him. And so for me, for us, there wasn't any discomfort or awkwardness. I never had to preface saying, it's not that we think we will divorce. Although I'm pretty sure I did say, I've been on my own a lot, and this is about me and for me and you, kinda, maybe, but mostly for me. And
What did it
he
take?
understood that.
Yeah,
What?
he's a good guy.
Yeah, I think in terms of how long that conversation lasted or how long it took, I think it probably took us a week to sort it out. Funnily enough, it actually took longer than I thought it would. I thought it would be like a simple conversation, straight one and done. But like we mentioned before, it really did uncover interesting conversations in ways that I hadn't anticipated. And so we actually had a couple of iterations, and it started to read almost like a list of things that we cared about. And we did go back and forth on a couple of items, and it was definitely a really great learning experience. I do feel that I learned more about him through this process. I was more rigid, I would say, in my positions because, again, having lived and breathed this and getting together a little older in life, I was a little bit more set in my ways, but still fair about it. And so hearing him out and then figuring out what that middle road was actually a really great exercise, honestly.
Really interesting. So, how did you work with your respective lawyers?
Here's a great example of do as we say, not as I do.
Oh dear.
Because, yeah, I mean, womp womp womp. Because we had pre-agreed on all things, we just had one lawyer finalize it and a second lawyer vet it. Because between us, there was really nothing to add or negotiate. We already knew what we wanted.
You still had 2 of
Yes,
them.
yeah, I mean, you needed it, right?
Yep,
To for it to be later on if it gets challenged or whatever
yep,
hits the fan, right? We can say we did it properly, there was no duress. These are all things that you may have to prove in court
yep.
if it gets to that level, right? Beyond that, yes, childcare is not included in the formal documents, but we, as part of this process, also discussed custody and what that would look like depending on how old our daughter was if our marriage were to end. It's not official, but we did document that as well, just as
Hmm.
a future reminder of better times. Um, and yeah, and I think it was important that we were clear on what happy us envisioned versus a maybe bitter and scorned future us might say.
Yeah, really interesting. And as I understand it, custody issues aren't something that you can negotiate away anyway. The court will always act in the child's best interest. Okay, so that's really interesting what you did in your marriage contract and what the experts think Taylor Swift did in hers. So let's just talk a little bit about the kinds of things that are typically in a marriage contract. There isn't a single standard marriage contract in Canada, but my understanding is that most of them are actually pretty straightforward and follow a pretty common approach. So basically, each partner decides in advance what will remain separate, what will be shared, and what will happen if the marriage ends. And from what you're saying, I think yours actually sounds pretty typical in that regard.
Yes, of course, some agreements are very complex, especially I would say for second or subsequent marriages. And when there are substantial assets involved or blended families, but a typical arrangement for a first marriage is generally pretty straightforward.
It begins with full financial disclosure. So both of you list your income, assets, debts, businesses, pensions, major financial interests, and hiding information can seriously weaken the contract. So don't do that.
Yeah, and it's pretty common for agreements to specify that each of you basically keeps the property you owned before the marriage. That would typically include investments, businesses, cottages, and family wealth. It may also protect future inheritances and gifts. Now, pro tip, during this process, it's also great to get your wills and estate plans done because it generally all requires the same information.
I think it's also pretty common for debts that are brought into the marriage to stay the responsibility of the person who incurred them.
Yep. So from there, the next step is to decide how the property you acquire during the marriage will be treated. Some couples agree to share it equally, some keep their assets separate, some have a combination of separate and some jointly owned.
Some agreements, as we've touched on a bit, might include something on spousal support, though, as we said, that can be reviewed by the courts for fairness if the marriage fails.
I think most contracts also include a clause that require a review after major life events, such as a birth of a child, and probably just in general, you should have some sort of schedule.
Yep. Yeah, and of course, confirmation that each of you received independent legal advice.
And that's pretty much it. Mine was pretty simple because our assets were very separate at the time, and then we bought a place together. So it was really the existential questions that were interesting and not necessarily the separate arrangements of assets that we bring into the marriage or sharing after.
Notice what isn't there. If you think about the stuff from Hollywood and celebrity gossip and all that kind of stuff, there are no clauses about things like infidelity or weight gain or sobriety or how often the couple has sex or custody and pet visitation schedules.
Yeah. Okay. Although crazier things have happened in the US. Before we leave this topic, I just want to say a very quick word about marriage versus common law rights. People somehow have the idea that if you've lived together for an extended period of time, it's the same thing as being married. This is not true, particularly when it comes to property rights. If you're living together, a cohabitation agreement can be just as important as marriage contract is to spouses, and it can go both ways. Some people think if I'm not married, I'm not on the hook for certain things, or I'm living together, that means I share everything equally. So it can absolutely fall on both sides of that spectrum. So not to live in ambiguity, have agreements in place, whether that's a marriage contract because you're married or legally married, or cohabitation agreements, because you'd be surprised the crazy stories we have personally heard about this.
It's a really important caution. Okay, on that note, what are our three key learnings for today?
Number one should surprise nobody. Marriage contracts are not just for rich people, they're for everyone. If you are getting married, have that financial futures conversation first while you are both calm and happy and working as a team. It doesn't matter how much money you have now, it doesn't matter how you expect the future to unfold. What matters is having honest conversations while you like each other. Talk it through early, and remember that you both need independent legal advice. Marriage contracts are about fairness for one another.
Number two, marriage contracts may not be romantic, but they are also not about expecting your marriage to fail. They are about the opportunity to discuss money, debt, property, inheritances, businesses, children, and what feels fair if life takes an unexpected turn. Think about them as an important part of good financial planning, just like having a will or buying insurance. And if your marriage does not turn out happily ever after, a good marriage contract can reduce conflict, protect you both, and provide peace of mind. And your future selves will thank you.
Finally, the most valuable thing about your marriage contract may not be the document itself. The most valuable thing may be the conversations you have while you're creating it. You've been exploring really important things like your financial values, risk tolerance, your expectations for your life together. And that may well turn out to be way more important to the future success of your marriage than the actual legal document itself.
So that's us. And a call out to Taylor Swift. You made heartbreak, Easter eggs, and friendship bracelets go mainstream. So why don't you do us all a favor and promote marriage contracts? This can be your next era.
You're
So
here.
So what do you think? Marriage contracts, yes or no? If you have one, how'd you approach it? If you don't, was it a conscious decision? If you'd like to share, why don't you drop us a line or 10 at notjustmoneypodcast@gmail.com.
Good talk. You've been listening to Not Just Money with Doretta and Li. Click on the show's description for links to resources related to today's conversation. Our aim is to share sources that provide objective information that can help you make informed financial decisions. Please rate and review our show. If you'd like to get in touch with us, email us at notjustmoneypodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to be featured on the show, you can send us your questions and comments by a written email, audio file, or video file. Please include your name and city. This show is produced and edited by Li, with original music by Leo Zhang cello and artwork by John Tu. Now for some legalese. Please note that the views expressed by our hosts and guests are theirs alone and should not be viewed as financial advice. This podcast is intended to be entertainment and educational in nature. Please seek additional professional support or information before acting on any podcast information. As always, good talk.